"Uncle, I know how to make your son walk," said the little beggar girl to the millionaire. Richard Blackwell watched his son through the glass of the physical therapy room, feeling that familiar ache that had haunted him for 2 years. His only child, Ethan, had been confined to a wheelchair since the accident, and despite all the money invested in the best specialists in the United States, no significant progress had been made. That's when he felt a gentle tug on the sleeve of his Italian suit. Turning around, he found himself face to face with a girl of about 7, her dark hair tied in a messy braid, wearing simple, worn-out clothes. She stared at him with an unsettling intensity. "Uncle, I know how to make your son walk," the girl said with a conviction surprising for someone so small. Richard frowned, confused by the presence of this child in the restricted area of the Elite Rehabilitation Center, the most prestigious recovery facility in New York. "How did you get in here, child? This area is restricted," he asked, scanning the room for a security guard. "My grandma works here in cleaning. My name's Lily. I saw your son yesterday, and again today. He's sad, isn't he? But I can help him walk again." "Listen, little one, I appreciate your concern, but my son is being treated by the best specialists in the country," Richard replied, trying to be kind despite his growing irritation. He didn't need a meddling child adding to his distress. "Big doctors don't know everything," Lily insisted, shaking her head. "My grandma takes care of people who can't walk back in the community. I've been helping her since I was little. There are ways the doctors don't know." Richard was about to call security when the door to the therapy room opened, and Dr. Thompson, the head physiotherapist of the center, stepped out with the same defeated expression Richard had grown accustomed to. "Mr. Blackwell, we're done. For today, Ethan is... Well, there's been no significant progress," the doctor said, avoiding direct eye contact. "Perhaps we should consider that clinic in Switzerland I mentioned." Before Richard could respond, Lily slipped under his arm and dashed into the therapy room, approaching Ethan before anyone could stop her. "Hi, I'm Lily. Can you wiggle?" "Your toes?" she asked, kneeling in front of the boy's wheelchair. Ethan, who rarely reacted to strangers, lifted his head and frowned at the bold little girl. Richard and Dr. Thompson rushed into the room. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell. I don't know how this girl got in here," said a woman in her 60s, appearing breathless in the doorway. "Lily, come here right now. How many times have I told you not to wander off?" "Is this your granddaughter?" "Mrs. Jenkins?" Dr. Thompson asked, clearly annoyed. "Yes, doctor, I'm sorry. My daughter is sick today and I had no one to watch her. I promise it won't happen again." While the adults talked, something extraordinary happened. Ethan, who had barely spoken to his therapists in months, stared intently at Lily, and to Richard's shock, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You have sky-colored eyes," Lily said, completely ignoring the commotion around her. "Back where I live, there was a boy who couldn't walk either. Then I taught him some games, and now he can stand up holding on to things." Ethan tilted his head, visibly interested. "What games?" he asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. Richard froze. His son had spoken spontaneously to a stranger. That hadn't happened since the accident. "Lily, that's enough!" Mrs. Jenkins stepped forward, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir. She's got this habit of wanting to help everyone. Back in Hope Gardens, she plays with the sick kids." "Wait!" Richard raised his hand, stopping the older woman. Something in that interaction sparked a glimmer of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. "Let her speak." Dr. Thompson shook his head disapprovingly. "Mr. Blackwell, with all due respect, we're following a scientific rehabilitation protocol. We can't allow a child with no medical knowledge to interfere with Ethan's treatment." "I just wanted to show the mirror game," said Lily, seeming smaller in front of the angry adults. "It's really cool, and it makes your legs want to move on their own." Ethan looked at his father, and Richard saw something in his son's eyes he hadn't seen in 2 years. Interest. "What game is this?" asked Richard, ignoring the doctor's exasperated sigh. "It's like this." Lily positioned herself in front of Ethan. "We pretend there's a mirror between us. I lift my leg and the other person has to try to copy it, even if they can only think about moving. The brain starts remembering how to do it." Dr. Thompson laughed in disbelief. "This is absurd. Neurorehabilitation doesn't work like this." Mr. Blackwell, I suggest, can we try? Ethan's voice interrupted the doctor, surprising everyone. Richard looked at his son, at the determined girl in front of him, and then at the specialist who, in 2 years of extremely expensive treatment, hadn't managed to elicit this kind of reaction from Ethan. 5 minutes, Richard finally said. Let her show this game for 5 minutes. What happened in those 5 minutes would forever change the lives of everyone in the room. Lily, with impressive ease, began making simple arm movements, which Ethan easily mimicked. Then she moved her legs in different ways, always telling funny stories about friends from the community, keeping Ethan completely engaged. Now, imagine there's a drum on the floor, she said, pointing to Ethan's feet. Try to tap it just with your toes just by thinking about it. Ethan concentrated, his face showing effort. For several seconds, nothing happened. Richard was about to end the awkward scene when he noticed Ethan's right foot twitched slightly. It wasn't an involuntary spasticity, common in his condition. It was a deliberate movement. Dr. Thompson, who had crossed his arms in disapproval, slowly uncrossed them, stepping closer to get a better look. "Do it again," he asked, his professional voice unable to hide his surprise. Ethan tried again, and this time 3 toes on his right foot clearly moved in a conscious effort. Richard brought his hand to his mouth, unable to contain his emotion. "Yes!" Lily exclaimed, jumping excitedly. "See? Your brain is remembering." At that moment, Mrs. Jenkins pulled Lily by the arm. "That's enough, we're disturbing the boy's treatment," she said, looking nervously at Richard. "Please don't fire me, sir. I need this job." Richard looked at the woman, at little Lily, and then at Ethan, who seemed more animated than he had in months of therapy. "No one's getting fired," he said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "In fact, Mrs. Jenkins, I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of Lily visiting Ethan a few times a week." "What?" Dr. Thompson interjected, incredulous. "Mr. Blackwell, this is completely irregular. This girl has no qualifications, no understanding of medicine or neurological rehabilitation. And yet, in 5 minutes, she achieved what we haven't seen in 2 years, Richard replied, a new determination in his voice. "Doctor, we'll continue with the official protocol, but I want to try this alternative approach as well." On the way home, in his chauffeur-driven Cadillac, Richard couldn't stop thinking about what he'd witnessed. Beside him, Ethan seemed different, a spark in his eyes that had been missing for so long. "She's funny," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Can I see her again?" Richard smiled, squeezing his son's hand. "Yes, champ, let's give it a try." What Richard didn't know was that this simple decision would set off a chain of events that would profoundly transform the lives of everyone involved, bringing hope where there had been despair and uniting people from completely different worlds. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 3 days later, Richard adjusted his Italian tie as he waited in the VIP lounge of the Elite Rehabilitation Center. Dr. William Foster, the medical director of the facility, had requested an urgent meeting, and Richard knew exactly why. His decision to allow Lily to participate in Ethan's sessions had caused a minor earthquake in the center's protocol-driven environment. "Mr. Blackwell, thank you for coming," said Dr. Foster as he entered the room with a folder in hand and a serious expression. "We need to discuss this unusual situation." "If you're referring to the girl Lily, there isn't much to discuss," Richard replied, with the firmness that had made him one of the country's most successful businessmen. "Oh, I've seen results, and I intend to continue the visits." Dr. Foster sighed, sitting across from Richard. "Mr. Blackwell, I understand your position as a father. Believe me, we all want Ethan's recovery. But we can't ignore medical protocols and allow a child with no training to interfere with a complex treatment." 3 sessions, Dr. Foster. Richard leaned forward. 3 sessions with Lily, and Ethan has shown more progress than in months of conventional treatment. He's speaking more, trying to move voluntarily, and even asked to try standing at the parallel bars yesterday. "Coincidence or placebo effect?" the doctor countered. "It could just be momentary excitement over something new. Besides, there are serious liability issues. If something goes wrong..." I take full responsibility, Richard interrupted. I'll sign any necessary paperwork. Before the doctor could respond, the door opened, and an elegant woman walked in without knocking. Catherine Blackwell, Richard's ex-wife and Ethan's mother, strode in with her face twisted in anger. "What's this about letting some street girl treat my son?" she demanded, tossing her designer purse onto the table. "Have you lost your mind, Richard?" Richard closed his eyes briefly, feeling the headache that invariably came with encounters with his ex-wife. "Catherine, she's not a street girl. She's the granddaughter of a clinic employee, and she's not treating Ethan, just playing with him in a way that, oddly enough, is stimulating movements none of your highly paid specialists have managed." "This is ridiculous," Catherine exclaimed. "Dr. Foster, as the director of this institution, I demand you put a stop to this nonsense immediately. We have a reputation to uphold." Dr. Foster looked uncomfortably between the ex-spouses. "We were just discussing that, Mrs. Blackwell. I share your concerns, but what?" Catherine cut him off. "There's no but here. Either you end this or we'll transfer Ethan to that clinic in Switzerland immediately." "We're not transferring Ethan anywhere," Richard said, keeping his voice steady. "Not now that we're finally seeing progress. And just to be clear, Catherine, the final decision about treatment is mine as established in the divorce agreement." Catherine narrowed her eyes, her flawless face hardening. "We'll see about that. My lawyer will be in touch today." When she left, slamming the door, Richard let out a weary sigh. "Dr. Foster, I know I'm asking for something unusual, but I'm begging you as a father. Give us a few more weeks with this approach. Maintain all regular protocols, add extra supervision if needed, but don't take away from Ethan the only thing that has sparked his interest since the accident." The doctor studied Richard for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 2 weeks, with constant supervision from our team. At the first sign of complications or regression, we go back exclusively to the standard protocol." Richard extended his hand. "Thank you, doctor. You won't regret it." When he arrived at the clinic the next day, Richard found Ethan in the physical therapy room, not in his usual slumped posture, but eagerly watching the door. When Lily walked in, accompanied by her grandmother and closely observed by 2 physical therapists and a doctor, the boy's face lit up. "You came," Ethan exclaimed. "Of course I did, silly," Lily replied, with the ease of someone unfazed by the luxurious clinic or the skeptical glances from the professionals. "I brought something for you." From her worn little backpack, she pulled out a colorful fabric pouch. "These are bean seeds," she explained, opening the pouch to show him. "Back in the community, we use them for the toe game. Like this?" Lily scattered the seeds on the floor and began demonstrating how to pick them up using only her toes. Ethan watched, fascinated. "I can't do that," he said, looking at his own motionless feet. "You can't do it yet," Lily corrected. "But you will. Start by just trying to touch a seed with your big toe. Even thinking about it helps." Dr. Thompson, who was supervising the session, crossed his arms skeptically. "This has no scientific basis," he murmured to Richard. "We're wasting valuable time." But Richard watched in amazement as Ethan focused intently and after several attempts managed to slightly move his right big toe, touching one of the seeds. "I did it!" Ethan exclaimed, his face glowing with triumph no matter how small. "See?" Lily smiled. "Tomorrow you'll pick up the seed and the day after you'll drag it." The girl's determination was contagious. By the end of the session, Ethan was exhausted but visibly excited. When everyone had left except Richard, Dr. Thompson approached. "There was a small voluntary movement in his right foot," he admitted, checking his notes. "I can't scientifically explain how her methods work, but they are working," Richard finished. "And that's all that matters to me, Doctor." In the weeks that followed, a routine developed. Lily visited Ethan 3 times a week, always bringing new games that, to the skeptical doctors, looked like child's play but gradually stimulated voluntary movement in the boy's legs. What no one expected was the benefit beyond the physical. Ethan, who had become withdrawn and depressed since the accident, now chatted animatedly, laughed at Lily's stories about life in the community, and for the first time showed interest in his own treatment. "Dad, Lily said there's a man where she lives who makes bamboo crutches. Ethan mentioned during dinner a month after the visits began. Can we visit her community sometime? Richard nearly choked on his wine. Hope Gardens. Ethan, that place is... He stopped, realizing what he was about to say. Dangerous, too poor, unsuitable for someone of his social standing. We'll see, son. First, let's focus on your recovery. The truth was, Richard was growing increasingly curious about the place where Lily had learned techniques that trained specialists didn't know. As a businessman, he recognized value wherever it existed, and there was something extraordinarily valuable in that girl's intuitive knowledge. The next morning, Richard decided to do something unusual. Instead of heading straight to the office, after dropping Ethan off at the clinic, he asked the driver to take him to Hope Gardens. He hadn't told anyone about this visit. Not Ethan, not the doctors, and certainly not his ex-wife, who kept threatening legal action to stop the alternative therapy. When the sleek black car turned onto the narrow streets of the community, it drew curious glances. Richard felt out of place in his Italian suit, but was determined to understand Lily's world better. Following the vague directions he had, Richard arrived at a small unfinished brick house. A makeshift sign read, Mrs. Jenkins, Caregiver. Hesitant, he knocked on the door. A young woman with features similar to Lily's answered, her expression wary. Can I help you? Good morning. My name is Richard Blackwell. I'm Ethan's father, the boy your niece Lily has been visiting at the clinic. The woman's eyes widened. You're the father of the boy in the wheelchair? Oh my, what happened? Did Lily do something wrong? No, quite the opposite, Richard quickly clarified. I came to thank you. I'm sorry, what's your name? Jennifer. I'm Lily's mother, she replied, still seeming puzzled by the presence of this obviously wealthy man at her doorstep. Would you like to come in? It's a bit messy, but thank you. Richard stepped inside the small house and immediately noticed how clean and tidy it was, despite its simplicity. In the living room, there were a few plastic chairs and, surprisingly, several makeshift physical therapy devices, wooden sticks tied together to form parallel bars, cushions of varying densities, and a kind of horizontal ladder on the floor made of bamboo. My mother won't be back from work until later, Jennifer explained, offering Richard a seat. Can I get you some coffee? No, thank you, Richard replied, his eyes drawn to a photograph on the wall showing a younger Lily beside a man in a wheelchair. Who's that? Jennifer followed his gaze and smiled sadly. My brother, Ryan. He had an accident when Lily was 3. He was paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors said he'd never walk again. Richard felt a chill. What happened to him? Jennifer hesitated. My mother always worked as a caregiver for the elderly, you know. She knows a lot about mobility exercises. When the doctors gave up on Ryan, she started developing her own techniques. Lily grew up watching it, helping. They turned everything into games because Ryan was so depressed. No one believed it would work. But after a year, he could stand with support. After 2 years, he took a few steps with crutches. And now? Richard asked, a new hope rising in his chest. Jennifer's smile faded. Ryan passed away 3 years ago. Not because of the paralysis. It was a hospital infection after. A routine surgery. Richard lowered his head, feeling the weight of that loss. I'm so sorry. After that, my mother started helping others in the community. There are so many here who can't afford treatment, you know. And Lily, well, she has this natural gift. To her, it's not exercises, it's play, and it works. Richard looked again at the makeshift equipment, feeling a mix of admiration and shame. While he'd spent fortunes on treatments of questionable effectiveness, this family had created real solutions with what little they had. Why did I come here today? Richard began, gathering his thoughts. Because your son is making progress no specialist has achieved in 2 years. And I want to understand how. Jennifer smiled. There's not much to understand, it's what my mother always says. Doctors treat the body, but they forget the mind has to want to heal. Lily makes the children want to heal. Before Richard could answer, the door opened and Lily came running in, stopping abruptly when she saw him. Uncle Richard, she exclaimed, surprised. You came to visit? Yes, Lily, I came to thank you for what you're doing for Ethan. The little girl's eyes sparkled. He's my friend now. Did you know yesterday he managed to hold onto the bar for 10 seconds? 10 seconds! Richard felt his eyes grow moist. Ethan hadn't told him that. No, I didn't know. That's amazing. Lily ran to a small chest in the corner of the room and pulled out colorful notebooks. Look, I made drawings to teach him the game so he can keep practicing at home. You can take them. Richard carefully took the notebooks. Each page was filled with bright illustrations of exercises, with simple instructions written in the imperfect handwriting of a 7-year-old. Lily, this is extraordinary. I have an idea, Lily said suddenly. Can you bring Ethan here one day? We have our bamboo bars, and Mr. Johnson at the bakery on the corner used to be in a wheelchair too. Now he walks with a cane. Richard glanced at Jennifer, who looked uneasy about the suggestion. Lily, Mr. Blackwell is very busy, and Ethan is in treatment at the center. Actually, Richard interrupted, surprising even himself. I think it's an excellent idea, if Jennifer allows it, of course. Lily's mother looked stunned. You'd really bring your son here, to Hope Gardens? Why not? Richard replied, a new perspective forming in his mind. If this is where the people who know how to help him are, then this is where we should be. As he left Hope Gardens that morning, Richard knew something inside him had changed. It wasn't just about Ethan's recovery anymore. It was about recognizing value where he'd never thought to look before. Yet, the path ahead wouldn't be easy. When he arrived at the office, he found 3 urgent messages from Catherine and a notification from her lawyer. The looming conflict would be the toughest test of his newfound resolve. But now, with Lily's colorful notebooks tucked safely in his leather briefcase, Richard had something money had never given him: real hope. 2 weeks later, Richard's carefully structured world was in turmoil. Catherine had filed for a custody modification, claiming Richard was putting their son's health at risk with unscientific alternative treatments. The hearing was scheduled for the following month, and his lawyers didn't hide their concern. She has a strong case, Mr. Blackwell, explained Dr. Miller, his lawyer for over a decade. The clinic's medical reports are divided. Some acknowledge progress, others dismiss it as temporary coincidence. And this business of taking Ethan to an underprivileged community, judges tend to be conservative about such matters. We're talking about a place where people are actually recovering, not a war zone, Richard snapped. What about Ethan's progress? Doesn't that count for anything? The lawyer adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. It does, of course, but Mrs. Blackwell is proposing to transfer him to a renowned clinic in Switzerland with internationally acclaimed doctors. From the court's perspective, it may seem like she's offering the best possible treatment. Richard ran his hands through his hair in frustration. How could he explain to a judge that Ethan's real progress didn't come from expensive equipment or fancy degrees on a wall, but from human connection and the intuitive approach of a 7-year-old girl? Prepare the best defense you can, Dr. Miller. I'm not backing down from this. As he faced the legal battle, Richard continued to witness Ethan's improvements. Following the illustrated recipes in Lily's notebooks, they practiced exercises together every night. Ethan could now stand supported by the parallel bars for nearly a minute and had regained feeling in most of his legs. Even more impressive was the emotional transformation. The once sullen boy now spoke excitedly about his progress, made plans for the future, and eagerly looked forward to Lily's visits. One Saturday afternoon, Richard finally kept his promise to take Ethan to Hope Gardens. Against all his advisor's recommendations and ignoring Catherine's legal threats, he helped his son into the adapted car. Are you sure you want to go, champ? Richard asked, giving Ethan one last chance to back out. The boy nodded firmly. I want to see where Lily lives. She always talks about the bamboo bars and her other friends. When they arrived at the community, Richard noticed Ethan didn't show the same shock he had felt upon seeing the poverty of the place. Instead, the boy looked around with genuine curiosity. Mrs. Jenkins greeted them at the door, visibly nervous about hosting the boss in her modest home. Welcome, sir. Ethan, it's so good to see you outside the clinic. Lily is waiting for you in the back. The backyard held a surprise. A small space had been transformed into an outdoor exercise area. The bamboo parallel bars were sturdier than Richard had imagined, tightly secured with colorful ropes. There were also wooden ramps of varying inclines, cushions of different sizes, and a path of textured stones. Lily wasn't alone. 5 other children were there, each with some physical limitation. A boy on crutches, a girl with one leg shorter than the other, a teenager practicing with a simple prosthetic. "Ethan!" Lily ran to greet them. "You finally came. Everyone, this is the friend I told you about." The children gathered around, curious but friendly. Richard watched in amazement as his son, usually shy around strangers, immediately started talking with them. "Is your dad really as rich as Lily says?" one boy asked bluntly, making Richard choke in surprise. Ethan laughed. "Yeah, but I don't think he's ever seen bamboo bars before." The children giggled, and to Richard's astonishment, so did Ethan. A genuine carefree laugh he hadn't heard in years. Mrs. Jenkins discreetly approached Richard. "Is everything all right, sir? If you'd prefer to wait inside—" "No, it's perfect," he replied, feeling an unexpected emotion as he watched Ethan interact so naturally with the other children. "Actually, I'd like to understand how you set up these equipment." Over the next few hours, Richard received an education no MBA could provide. He learned how Mr. Johnson, a local baker and former patient of Mrs. Jenkins, had developed the bamboo bars after being unable to afford professional therapy equipment. He saw how the local children turned tedious exercises into fun competitions. He observed the intuitive approach that blended physical movement with emotional engagement. And most importantly, he watched his son being treated not as the rich kid in the wheelchair, but simply as Ethan, just another friend in the group. By the end of the day, when Ethan showed everyone how he could stand on the bars for nearly 2 minutes, the cheers and applause were so heartfelt that Richard let tears stream down his face without shame. "Dad, can we come back next week?" Ethan asked on the way home, his eyes shining with excitement. "Jack said he'll teach me his trick for turning in the chair without using his hands." Richard smiled, squeezing his son's hand. "Of course we can, champ." What he didn't tell Ethan was that next week they'd have the hearing with Catherine, and that depending on the outcome, future visits to Hope Gardens could become impossible. On the morning of the hearing, Richard adjusted his tie in the mirror when his phone rang. It was Dr. Thompson, Ethan's physical therapist. "Mr. Blackwell, we need you to come to the clinic immediately." Richard's heart raced. Did something happen to Ethan? Is he okay? "Yes, he's fine, but it's better you see for yourself." When Richard arrived at the clinic, he was quickly led to the physical therapy room. As he entered, he froze in the doorway. Ethan was on the professional parallel bars, completely upright, supporting his own weight without using his arms. Dr. Thompson and 2 other specialists watched, taking notes, their expressions barely concealing astonishment. "Dad, look what I can do now!" Ethan exclaimed. Slowly, with visible but determined effort, Ethan moved his right leg forward. It wasn't a full step. His foot just dragged a few inches, but it was undeniably a voluntary movement. "My God," Richard murmured, stepping closer as if in a trance. "We've tested his reflexes and muscle activity," Dr. Thompson said professionally, though his voice betrayed excitement. "There's definite nerve regeneration. I can't fully explain how, but I've been practicing Lily's games every day," Ethan interrupted proudly. "And Jack from Hope Gardens taught me his technique of imagining ants crawling. So up my legs, it really works." Dr. Thompson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable attributing progress to games and techniques from untrained children. "The important thing is we're seeing significant improvement. Well, Mr. Blackwell, given these developments, I'll revise my testimony for today's hearing." Richard looked at the doctor, surprised. "You'll support continuing his current treatment?" Dr. Thompson hesitated. "I'll state that we're seeing real progress and that regardless of unconventional methods involved, stopping the current approach would harm the patient." It was less than Richard had hoped for, but far more than he'd had weeks ago. "Thank you, Doctor." By the time he arrived in court that afternoon, Richard felt more confident. He had not only Dr. Thompson's revised testimony, but also a video of Ethan moving his leg voluntarily. He was ready to fight with everything he had. What he didn't expect was to see Catherine walk in, accompanied not just by her lawyers, but also by Lily and Mrs. Jenkins. "What's going on?" he asked, confused. Catherine approached, strangely calm for someone about to enter a legal battle. We need to talk before the hearing. In a private room with both sides' attorneys present, Catherine explained, I went to Hope Gardens yesterday. You what? Richard couldn't hide his shock. I wanted to see the place for myself, to understand what was helping our son when nothing else worked. She glanced at Lily, who looked out of place in her best dress, clearly a bought for the occasion. This girl showed me things I never imagined. What exactly did you see? Catherine took a deep breath. I saw children with far fewer resources than Ethan, overcoming limitations doctors said were permanent. I saw real hope, not just expensive promises from luxury clinics. She hesitated, and I saw our son smiling as he struggled to stand, cheered on by children who barely have enough to eat but have an abundance of spirit. Richard studied his ex-wife, searching for signs of manipulation or strategy. He found none. So, what do you want? I want to withdraw the custody modification request. I want us to continue the current treatment, including visits to Hope Gardens. Catherine straightened her shoulders. But I also want to propose something more. She turned to Lily and Mrs. Jenkins. I spoke with Lily's grandmother. She has valuable knowledge she developed while caring for people without access to formal treatments. And Lily, well, she has a natural gift no medical school could teach. Richard was beginning to understand where Catherine was going with this. You want to formalize their participation in Ethan's treatment. More than that, Catherine replied, a determined gleam in her eyes. I want to use our resources to create a community center in Hope Gardens, where the formal knowledge of doctors can combine with the intuitive techniques they've developed there. A place where children like Ethan can receive treatment without feeling like patients. Richard looked at his ex-wife as if seeing her for the first time. The cold, calculating woman he'd known during years of an unhappy marriage had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely passionate about helping. Catherine, this is unexpected. I know, she smiled faintly. Let's just say nearly losing custody of my son made me reevaluate a lot of things. And seeing Ethan yesterday trying to walk, laughing with the other kids, her voice wavered. I realized I was so focused on finding the perfect cure that I was missing the moments of real healing. Lily, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Grandma always says healing isn't just about the body. It's about the whole person. Mrs. Jenkins blushed, embarrassed by the profound simplicity of her granddaughter's words. It's just what we've learned over a lifetime. Without formal studies, Richard looked around the room, feeling a strange sense that something much bigger than Ethan's recovery was happening here. Let's do it, he said finally. Not just the community center, but a program to document and validate these intuitive techniques so they can help more people. When they left the room, the hearing was cancelled by mutual agreement. The lawyers, clearly confused by the sudden cooperation between the ex-spouses, were dismissed. And Lily, watching the adults with her innocent wisdom, smiled as if she'd always known this would be the outcome. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now continuing, 6 months had passed since that day in court. The New Steps Community Center in Hope Gardens had become a reality, occupying what was once an abandoned warehouse. The project, funded by the newly established Blackwell Foundation, combined modern clinical spaces with areas replicating the improvised equipment that had worked for years in the community. On a sunny Saturday morning, Richard parked his car, now a more modest model, in front of the center. Ethan had insisted on arriving early to help prepare for the 6-month celebration. As he entered, Richard couldn't help but smile at the transformation. The once grey walls now displayed colorful murals painted by the children. The central space had become a gathering area where patients of all ages shared experiences, and most importantly, there was an atmosphere of hope, no luxury. Clinic could replicate. Mr. Blackwell, so glad you're here early. Mrs. Jenkins, now the center's community coordinator, hurried over. Ethan is demonstrating the exercises for the new volunteers. That boy has a natural talent for teaching. Richard followed. Mrs. Jenkins to the main room, where he found a scene that 6 months ago he would have thought impossible. Ethan was standing, supported by a light cane, moving slowly among a group of physical therapy students interning at the center. Beside him, Lily pointed to a colorful diagram they had created together. "The secret is not to think about the whole leg," Ethan explained with the seriousness of an experienced teacher. "You start by imagining just the big toe moving, then work your way up. That's how I began." The students took notes, genuinely interested. The Hope Gardens Protocol, as it was being called, had started attracting attention from rehabilitation professionals across the United States. "Dad!" Ethan exclaimed when he saw Richard. "We're teaching the tingling technique to the new ones." Richard approached, still amazed by his son's transformation. Ethan could now stand unsupported for several minutes and walk short distances with his cane. The doctors, once skeptical, now documented his case as an example of exceptional recovery. "I can see that, champ. I don't think I could have explained it better myself." Dr. Thompson, whom no one expected to embrace unconventional methods, entered the room carrying folders of documents. "Good morning, Richard. We need to talk about the preliminary study results. They're remarkable." The study the doctor referred to was a formal analysis of the methods developed at Hope Gardens. For 6 months, they had meticulously documented the application of intuitive techniques alongside conventional therapies. The initial results showed significantly higher recovery rates in the group receiving the combined approach. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of practice," Dr. Thompson admitted as he showed Richard the charts. "There's something about the emotional component, the playful approach that seems to activate neurological pathways conventional therapies don't reach." Richard smiled. "Lily always said healing isn't just about the body." The doctor nodded, slightly embarrassed to be scientifically confirming what a 7-year-old had said all along. "We'll present these results at the International Rehabilitation Congress next month. We've already received invitations to implement the program in 3 public hospitals." "What about training?" Richard asked. That was another part of the project. Recognizing that Mrs. Jenkins and other informal caregivers in the community had real intuitive knowledge, they had established a certification program to validate, preserve, and pass on that wisdom. "The first 10 community caregivers received their certificates today," Dr. Thompson replied. "Mrs. Jenkins will teach the first module of the course at General Hospital next semester. Who would have thought, right?" The celebration was set to begin at noon. As the hour approached, the center filled up. Residents of Hope Gardens, patients and their families, healthcare professionals, students, all gathered to mark the unlikely project's success. Richard watched it all with a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced in his years of building his business empire. Seeing Ethan interacting with other children, teaching and learning, moving with growing confidence, that was a richness no financial investment could bring. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Catherine's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had arrived for the celebration, elegant as always, but with a new softness in her expression. "To think I almost stopped all this out of pride and prejudice." Richard turned to his ex-wife. Over the past months, as they worked together on the center's project, the bitterness of their divorce had slowly given way to a mutual respect neither had expected to rediscover. "We've all learned so much on this journey," he replied. Catherine watched Ethan, who was laughing with Lily and the other children. "He's so different. It's not just the physical progress. It's like he's found his purpose." It was true. Ethan, once isolated and depressed, now talked of becoming a doctor to help kids like himself. He and Lily had created a handbook of healing games, hand-illustrated, which was being adapted into a formal guide for use in other centers. A movement on the makeshift stage signaled that the ceremony was about to begin. Mrs. Jenkins adjusted the microphone, nervous in her role as the keynote speaker. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice growing more confident as she spoke. 6 months ago, we opened the doors of the New Steps Community Center with a simple idea that true healing comes when we combine formal knowledge with the wisdom of the heart. The audience applauded. Among those present, Richard noticed journalists and even a representative from the Department of Health. What had started as a local project was beginning to gain national recognition. Today we want to celebrate not just the physical progress of our patients, but also the growth of a community that has learned their voices and knowledge have value, Mrs. Jenkins continued. And to show what we've achieved together, I'd like to call someone very special. There was a murmur of anticipation as Ethan stood up, leaving his cane on the chair. Lily stayed by his side, ready to help if needed, but keeping her distance to let him have his moment. With careful yet determined steps, Ethan walked to the stage on his own. It was just 5 steps, slow and a little unsteady, but completely independent. When he reached the microphone, the room erupted in applause. "A year ago," Ethan began, his voice young but steady, "I thought I'd never walk again. The doctors said my injury was too severe. I had given up." Richard felt tears streaming freely down his face, unashamed of his emotions. Then, a girl walked into my physical therapy room and said she knew how to help me. Ethan smiled at Lily in the audience. Everyone thought it was crazy, even my dad at first. But you know what happened? She didn't just know how to move my feet again. She taught me to believe I could get better. And that was the most important thing. Catherine squeezed Richard's hand, silently sharing the emotion of the moment. Today, I want to thank Lily, Mrs. Jenkins, and everyone at Hope Gardens who opened their lives to me and my family. You didn't just give me exercises to do. You gave me friends, purpose, and showed me that the path to healing is better when no one walks it alone. The simplicity and sincerity of the boy's words moved everyone. At the back of the room, Dr. Thompson discreetly wiped away his own tears, while the medical and physical therapy students present witnessed a lesson no textbook could teach: the power of human connection in the healing process. After Ethan's speech, Lily joined him on stage to introduce the new Little Healers program, where recovering children became partners in treating other kids. "When we teach what we've learned, we learn it twice," she explained with her simple wisdom, "and it's more fun to get better with a friend." The celebration continued with presentations, testimonials, and demonstrations of the techniques they'd developed. What impressed outside visitors the most was seeing how advanced medical knowledge blended seamlessly with intuitive methods developed in the community. There was no hierarchy of knowledge, just mutual respect and a shared goal. By late afternoon, as the celebration turned into a community party with music and food prepared by local residents, Richard found a moment to talk to Lily, who was helping Ethan practice a new balance exercise. "Lily, remember the first day you walked into the physical therapy room?" he asked, kneeling to meet her eye level. She grinned. "Yes, you almost sent me away." Richard laughed. "That's true. You know that day when you said, 'Uncle, I know how to make your son walk'? I thought it was just a child being a child. I never imagined those words would change so many lives." Lily shrugged with the natural modesty of someone who simply does what she knows without expecting recognition. "I just wanted to help." Ethan seemed sad, and when we're sad, it's harder to get better. Richard watched his son, now practicing side steps with Lily's minimal assistance. "You know you're special, don't you?" he said, moved. "There are adults who study for years and still don't understand what you grasp naturally." "It's not that hard," Lily replied thoughtfully. "We just need to listen to what the body is trying to say. And remember that the head and heart need to heal along with the legs. That's what Grandma taught me." Just then, Jennifer approached, holding an envelope. "Mr. Blackwell, the letter from the school arrived," she said, her voice a mix of pride and nervousness. Richard knew what it was about. After discovering Lily's natural talent, he and Catherine had insisted on enrolling her in a top-tier preparatory school with a scholarship covering not just tuition, but all materials, transportation, and extra needs. At first, Jennifer and Mrs. Jenkins had resisted, fearing Lily might lose her roots, but they eventually agreed that formal education would open important doors for her. "Well?" Richard asked, as anxious as Jennifer. With trembling hands, Jennifer opened the envelope and read the letter, her eyes filled with tears. She got in, with top marks in the interview. Lily seemed more concerned about Ethan's reaction than her own achievement. "I can still come here after school, right?" she asked, looking at her friend. "We still have to finish our exercise book." "Of course," Richard assured her. "In fact, we're thinking of doing something special with that book of yours." The book of healing games. which had started as simple drawings and instructions, was being turned into a formal publication. A medical publisher had shown interest in releasing it as a supplement for pediatric therapists, preserving the children's original illustrations and adding scientific explanations for why and how the exercises worked. The royalties will go into a scholarship fund, Richard explained, so other kids from Hope Gardens can have the same opportunities as you. Lily's eyes widened. We're going to be real writers, Ethan. Ethan smiled, balancing more steadily. We'll be doctors. One day, both of us. It was an ambitious dream for two children who just 6 months earlier had faced very different but equally challenging barriers. Ethan, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond and a depression that isolated him. Lily, limited by poverty and lack of educational opportunities, despite her natural talent. Now both looked to the future with the certainty of those who had already overcome the impossible. The celebration lasted until dusk. Healthcare professionals chatted animatedly with community caregivers, exchanging knowledge without hierarchies. Children with varying mobility levels participated in adapted games, supervised by young therapists learning firsthand the value of a playful approach. Richard and Catherine, sitting side by side as they took in the scene, shared a comfortable silence they'd never known during their marriage. You know what amazes me the most, Catherine finally said. How all this started with one simple sentence. Uncle, I know how to make your son walk. Richard nodded. Sometimes the biggest changes begin with the simplest words. If I'd followed my instinct that day and sent Lily away. But you didn't send for it, Catherine gently interrupted. You listened. And that made all the difference. Watching Ethan practice his steps, now more confident and steady, Richard felt profound gratitude. The money he had accumulated, through years of hard work, had finally found its noblest purpose, not just helping his own son, but creating a legacy that would benefit countless other families. The New Steps Community Center was only the beginning. There were already plans to expand the model to other communities, create training programs for caregivers, and develop research to scientifically validate the intuitive knowledge that had been ignored by the traditional medical system. And all because a little girl had the courage to tell a powerful businessman, Uncle, I know how to make your son walk. By the end of the evening, when most guests had left, Richard found Ethan and Lily sitting on the parallel bars, sketching new exercises in their shared notebook. Time to go home, champ, he said, walking over. It's been a big day. Ethan stood up without help, reaching for his cane with growing ease. Dad, Lily had an amazing idea for the next chapter of our book. Can we show you tomorrow? I can't wait to see it, Richard replied sincerely. As they said goodbye, Lily hugged Ethan with the natural ease of a true friend. Remember to practice the imaginary trampoline exercise before bed, she advised. Seriously, it helps your brain remember the movements while you sleep. I promise, Ethan answered before turning to Richard with a knowing smile. Lily just knows things. On the drive home, Richard reflected on how a small twist of fate had transformed not just Ethan's life but his own. Before his son's accident, he had been just another successful businessman, buried in work and distant from what truly mattered. The accident had been devastating, but it had also opened a path to a more meaningful existence. Dad? Ethan's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Yes, son. Thank you for believing in Lily that day. I know it sounded crazy. Richard smiled, touched by his son's maturity. You know, Ethan, I've learned something important these past few months. Sometimes wisdom comes in the most unexpected forms, and we have to be open to recognizing it, even when it's a little girl saying something that seems impossible. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I think that's why I'm getting better, because Lily made me believe it was possible, even when everyone else said it wasn't. Exactly, and that's what the New Step Center is doing for so many others. Showing that when we combine knowledge with hope, the impossible becomes possible. When they arrived home, Ethan managed to get out of the car with minimal help. His movements were still slow and deliberate, but the determination on his face showed that every step was a personal victory. Richard watched his son walk into the house, leaning on his cane, and knew that no matter how much more Ethan might progress physically, he had already achieved the greatest healing of all. He had found purpose, connection, and hope. And it all started with one simple sentence, spoken with the innocent conviction of a child who knew no limits. "Uncle, I know how to make your son walk." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It means so much to us as we're just starting out. Now continuing, a year and a half had passed since the opening of the New Steps Community Center. What had begun as a local project now drew visitors from across the United States and even neighboring countries. The innovative approach that combined traditional medicine with community knowledge had gained international recognition, receiving an award for public health innovation. On a sunny Sunday morning, Richard was driving his own car, he no longer used a chauffeur for these trips, toward Hope Gardens. In the passenger seat, Ethan adjusted his tie, visibly nervous. "Do you think there'll be a lot of people?" asked the boy, now 11 years old, and carrying a confidence that contrasted with the depressed child he'd been 2 years earlier. "Most likely," Richard replied with a smile. "It's not every day that two such young authors launch a book that's already available for pre-order in 5 countries. Ethan grinned, looking down at the copy of Healing Games, a kid's illustrated guide for kids in his lap. The colorful cover featured drawings by him and Lily, along with contributions from other children at the center. What had started as a simple exercise notebook had now become an international publication. "Is Lily as nervous as I am?" Ethan asked. "Knowing her, she's probably more worried about making sure everyone has fun at the party than the actual launch," Richard answered, well acquainted with the girl's practical nature. When they arrived at the center, they were met with a stunning transformation. The space, usually arranged for therapeutic activities, had been decorated for the big celebration. Colorful banners, balloons, and a large table showcasing the book dominated the main area. But the most impressive sight was the number of people gathered there. Healthcare professionals, families served by the center, representatives from hospitals and universities, and even television crews crowded the space. Richard spotted a reporter from a national network preparing for a live broadcast. "Ethan!" Lily's cheerful voice cut through the crowd. She wore a new dress, a gift from Catherine for the occasion, but kept her hair in simple braids as always. "Finally! I thought you'd never get here." Ethan stepped out of the car without assistance, using his cane only for balance. His steps, though still careful, no longer carried the hesitation from months before. The combination of physical therapy and the techniques of the Hope Gardens method, as it was now formally called, had produced progress that even the most optimistic doctors found surprising. "I'm nervous," Ethan admitted, adjusting his tie again. "There are so many important people here." Lily rolled her eyes, as impatient as ever. "They're just people, silly. And the book isn't about impressing important people. It's about helping kids like us, remember?" Her straightforward practicality always put things into perspective. Richard watched the two friends walk into the center together, Ethan occasionally, leaning on Lily's shoulder when he needed extra stability. It was a partnership that had begun with an unlikely phrase and blossomed into something extraordinary. Inside the center, Mrs. Jenkins, now the official coordinator of the Community Caregivers Program, greeted guests with the dignity of someone who finally saw her knowledge receiving the recognition it deserved. Beside her, Jennifer, who had completed a nursing certification thanks to a scholarship from the Blackwell Foundation, guided a team of young volunteers from the community. "Mr. Richard!" Mrs. Jenkins approached, embracing him warmly. Gone was the timid employee who once feared losing her job because of her meddling granddaughter. The health secretary confirmed his attendance, and we have representatives from 3 universities interested in including the method in their physical therapy curriculum. Richard smiled, genuinely pleased by the project's success, but even more so by the transformation he saw in the people around him. The center hadn't just created a new treatment model, it had restored dignity and purpose to an entire community. "Congratulations, Mrs. Jenkins. None of this would exist without your wisdom." She blushed, still uncomfortable with praise. "It was God who placed Lily in your path that day. The rest was just a consequence." The launch ceremony was scheduled to begin at 11 a.m. As guests settled in, Richard noticed Catherine's arrival, elegant as ever, but with a serenity that had replaced her former constant tension. Beside her stood Dr. Thompson, now the center's medical director and the leading scientific advocate for the Hope Gardens method in academic circles. "Incredible, isn't it?" Catherine remarked, stepping closer to Richard. "To think it all started because a 7-year-old girl had the courage to say what none of us could see." Richard nodded, watching Ethan and Lily at the center of the makeshift stage, organizing their notes for the presentation. "Did you know the book has already been adopted by 15 pediatric rehabilitation centers?" Catherine continued. "Dr. Thompson received an invitation to present the method at a congress in Paris next month. The numbers aren't what matter." "Most," Richard replied, his values entirely transformed since the start of this journey. "It's what's happening over there." He pointed to a corner of the room where a boy of about 8 with obvious motor difficulties was being patiently guided by Ethan through one of the book's exercises. The scene perfectly captured the essence of the project: children helping children, knowledge being passed on, hope multiplying. The ceremony began promptly. The publishing director gave a brief introduction, followed by Dr. Thompson, who explained the scientific foundation, validating the intuitive methods documented in the book. Finally, it was Ethan and Lily's turn to speak. The two stepped onto the stage together, Ethan walking with growing confidence, using his cane more out of caution than necessity. When they reached the microphone, they exchanged a nervous but determined glance. "Good morning, everyone," Ethan began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "My name is Ethan Blackwell, and this is my friend Lily Peterson. 2 years ago, I was in a wheelchair believing I'd never walk again." Lily took the microphone, continuing the story with the ease of someone who had lived it deeply. "And I was just the janitor's granddaughter, with ideas no one took seriously." She smiled at her grandmother in the audience. "But my grandma always said, when you have something important to say it, even if no one's ready to listen." Ethan picked up again. "Then one day, Lily walked into my physical therapy room and said, 'Uncle, I know how to make your son walk.' Everyone thought it was crazy. Except Ethan," Lily added. "He was the first to believe in me, and that made all the difference." The simplicity and honesty of their story held everyone's attention. There were no complicated medical terms or big words, just the real story of 2 children who together had defied the impossible. "Our book isn't complicated," Ethan continued, holding up a copy. "These are games that turn boring exercises into fun things. Stories that help you forget the pain and remember what your body can do. And most importantly," Lily added, "it was written by kids for kids. Because sometimes we need to remind adults that healing doesn't have to be sad or scary. It can be play." After briefly presenting the book's content, Ethan and Lily invited other children from the center to demonstrate some of the exercise games. It was a moving moment, watching children with different physical challenges teaching each other, laughing and encouraging one another. Richard watched it all with a lump in his throat. Your son, who 2 years ago barely spoke to strangers, was now on stage, confident, demonstrating exercises he had helped create himself, inspiring other children with his story of overcoming adversity. When the presentation ended, there was a long-standing ovation. The visibly moved health minister then and there announced plans to expand the program to 20 new centers in underserved communities across the United States, using the model developed at Hope Gardens. The book signing that followed was touching. Ethan and Lily signed each copy with dedication, talking to children and parents who shared their own stories of challenges and hopes. For many present, the book represented more than an exercise guide. It was a symbol of possibilities. At the end of the event, as most guests had already dispersed, Richard found Ethan and Lily sitting in a quiet corner, flipping through their own book with expressions somewhere between pride and disbelief. "So, authors," he asked, sitting beside them, "how do you feel?" "Strange," Ethan answered honestly. "I still remember how it was, Dad. Sitting in that chair, thinking my life was over. And now you're an example for other children," Richard finished, squeezing his son's shoulder with pride. Lily, ever practical, was already thinking ahead. "We need to start the second book," she said, opening a notebook full of new drawings. "This one will be for older kids with more advanced exercises, and I had an idea to make videos too," Richard laughed at the girl's endless energy. "One thing at a time, Lily. You just released the first one." But he knew it was no use suggesting they slow down. The partnership between Ethan and Lily had created its own momentum, fueled by the perfect combination of his son's methodical determination and the girl's intuitive creativity. Catherine approached, joining the group. "Congratulations, kids, the book is wonderful." She handed Lily a small box. "A gift for your achievement." Lily opened the box and found a delicate necklace with a bird-shaped pendant. "To remind you that your ideas will now fly to help children all over the world," Catherine explained. The girl spontaneously hugged Catherine, something unthinkable months ago, when Richard's ex-wife still saw Lily as an unqualified outsider. As he watched the scene, Richard reflected on the extraordinary transformations triggered by one simple sentence. "Uncle, I know how to make your son walk." Words spoken with a child's innocence and conviction, yet carrying wisdom all the experts had missed. The New Steps Community Center had become more than a treatment facility. It was a meeting place where different worlds and knowledge came together, where hierarchies dissolved, and where healing was understood in its fullest form: physical, emotional, and social. Ethan now attended school regularly, using his cane, less and less. His doctors predicted he might leave it behind completely within another year. Even more striking was his psychological transformation, from an isolated, depressed boy to a confident young man planning to study medicine. Lily, meanwhile, excelled at her new school, balancing academic rigor with her work at the center. Her natural ability to connect with struggling children had caught the attention of child psychology researchers, documenting her intuitive approach. And Richard, the ruthless businessman focused solely on financial results, had been replaced by a man who found purpose in using his resources to transform lives. The Blackwell Foundation, initially created to manage the center, now supported various projects that combined traditional and formal knowledge in underserved areas. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" asked Ethan, noticing Richard's distant gaze. "About how the greatest lessons of my life came from where I least expected," he answered honestly. "And how grateful I am that I listened when a little girl said she knew how to make my son walk." Lily smiled with the simple wisdom that always defined her. "Grandma always says, sometimes the answer is right in front of us. We just need to be ready to see it." And there, in that simple moment of connection, was the true essence of the miracle they had created together. The ability to listen, to learn, and to believe that the impossible is just something that hasn't found its way yet. In the years that followed, the Hope Gardens method expanded beyond the borders of the United States, bringing hope and new rehabilitation approaches to children in many countries. Ethan and Lily continued their partnership, creating more books, videos, and programs that blended intuitive wisdom with scientific knowledge. But for Richard, the greatest success wasn't in the awards, recognition, or international expansion. It was in his son's increasingly steady steps, the confidence shining in his eyes, and the certainty that true healing comes when we open our minds and hearts to possibilities that, at first glance, seem impossible. And all because, at a crucial moment, he chose to listen when a little girl said, "Uncle, I know how to make your son walk." The end. Dear listeners, if this journey of overcoming has touched your heart, don't keep this feeling to yourself. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that show miracles happen when we open our hearts to the unexpected.